I'm Aaron Ross Powell, host of a new podcast from the UnPopulist called Reactionary Minds. Reactionary Minds is a show about why some people reject liberalism and what the rest of us can do about it. My first conversation features Shika Dalmia, editor of the UnPopulist newsletter and fellow at the Mercatus Center's program on pluralism and civil exchange. It's about introducing the problem Reactionary Minds exists to address. What is illiberalism? Why is it on the rise? And why should we be concerned about it? Here's an excerpt from our conversation. This show is not called The Authoritarian Mind. It's not called The Populist Mind. It is called Reactionary Minds. And so where does the term reactionary fit into all this?
You know, you and I both talked about why we like reactionary minds. And I'll give you my side of why I like it. And perhaps you can say something about why you like it. So, the textbook definition of reactionary is a person or a sensibility that is opposed to economic or political liberalization of any kind. And so usually it goes along with a certain conservative mentality. But I think there's another element to the reactionary sensibility, and that is it is also sort of anti-ideas and it's anti-intellectual. And the reason is ideas and intellectual theories then can lead to change. They can lead to, they require a certain amount of openness to the world and to knowledge, and those can be intensely threatening to existing cultural orders, right? And so in that sense, reactionary minds, I think, is a good way to describe this show. Because as you and I are both, as we know, quite troubled and perturbed by the last 6 years. I mean, things are happening in America that we never thought would be possible. And we think that there needs to be some kind of a response to this, right? But we can't really fight these ideologies unless we understand them. And so we do want to understand the reactionary movement that's brewing in America on its own terms. And so that's sort of the reason I like the term reactionary mind.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And what I would add is I think that you can make the case that ideology, political ideology, moral ideology, and so on, is to some extent downstream of personality, that we tend to have different personal and personality preferences, and then we sometimes look around for theories or intellectual edifices that provide structure to them or support them or don't really challenge them. And in that regard, I think reactionary is also it is a personality type that says I am turned off by, sometimes threatened by diversity, by change, by things being different than the way that I'm used to, or people who aren't like me being more prominent than they used to be, or higher status than they used to be, or the way we talk about language is changing and that bugs me, and I don't like these kids with their asking me to use different pronouns or different terminology. Like there is this set in my waysness that drives a lot of this, and it's not an accident that Trump he led with, when he was first running for president, he led with anti-immigration, with a xenophobic perspective and a nationalism that was the corollary of that, because for a lot of his most faithful followers, it's America is looking different than either the way I was used to it being, or the way that I imagined it being, or the way that I would like it to look. Demographic. On the far fringes of the populists, we get great replacement theory about they're trying to change the demographics of the country to make it less white than it used to be. There is this very I don't like difference, and then reacting strongly against that. And then that feeds into political preferences, which is I'm going to vote for the person who will stop the change, whether that's preventing immigrants who don't look and talk like me from coming into the country, or will elevate the status of the people who have the same preferences I do against the people with the diverse preferences that I dislike. And that's another thing that I want to dig into on this show is the way that there is such a thing, I think, as a populist or an authoritarian or reactionary, like psychology as well. So there's ideas that inform it, but there's also just beliefs and values and attitudes. And they end up mixing together into this very toxic political outcome. But that was the attraction to me of the Reactionary Minds, because it gets both the notion that this is an ideological perspective, but also that this is just an attitudinal perspective.
Right. That's very well stated, Aaron. I would, however, push back just slightly in that, we do want to make a distinction between the conservative mind and the reactionary mind, right? I mean, Bill Buckley's very famous statement about when he launched the National Review was, he wants to stand athwart history and, screaming or yelling, stop. And, there is a way in which, even though I am not a conservative, never have been, never will be, I can understand the urge to be careful about change and to, reform and to be a little deliberative, to, you don't want to simply throw out existing social arrangements just because there is some fad, that has taken hold of the land. So there is a way in which conservatives, even though I'm not a conservative, they can be incrementalist but not completely opposed to reform. Reactionaries, I think, is conservatism on steroids in that sense. Reactionaries simply don't want change because they don't like change. And usually, like I said, reactionariness is a phenomenon that's usually associated with conservatism. But to the extent that it's not just any change that reactionaries are opposed to, it's actually liberalism that they are opposed to. It's liberalization they are opposed to. To the extent it's liberalization they are opposed to, they can even come from the progressive side, right? Like communists, when China liberalized its economy to some extent, there were reactionaries in China, who wanted the communist order to hold and they didn't want liberalization. So in that sense, I like the term reactionary because potentially it will even capture the leftist reactionaries.
The first episode of Reactionary Minds is releasing soon and will be available on all major podcast apps. Subscribe now to get that first episode as soon as it comes out.